A king's power wasn't just found at the edge of a sword, but in the purity of his silver. Imagine a world where shaving a few milligrams off a coin could fund a global conquest or trigger a total economic collapse. We're uncovering how medieval monarchs used metallurgical discipline to turn feudal chaos into the world's first superpowers. The traditional historical narrative of medieval European statecraft is often painted with the broad brushstrokes of chivalric romance, dynastic marriage, theological conflict, and the thunderous charge of armored cavalry across muddy battlefields. Yet beneath the vibrant pageantry of the feudal era lay a far more potent, calculating, and ultimately decisive engine of nation-building, the systematic manipulation of the money supply. Long before the advent of modern central banking or the establishment of international monetary funds, the sovereigns of Europe recognized a fundamental truth of governance. The true arbiter of geopolitical supremacy was not the sword, but the mint. The slow, violent transition of the European continent from a sprawling, disorganized patchwork of decentralized baronies into a cohesive network of centralized, administratively robust nation-states was, at its very core, a story of monetary policy. By aggressively gaining control over the issuance, weight, and metallurgical purity of coinage, monarchs discovered a highly effective mechanism to dissolve the constraints of unpredictable feudal levies, finance permanent professional standing armies, and project royal authority across unprecedented distances. The medieval mint became the ultimate theater of statecraft, a fiery crucible where base metals were alchemized into fiscal sovereignty, and where the meticulous, unforgiving discipline of metallurgy laid the enduring administrative and geographic foundations of the modern political map. To understand the revolutionary and transformative impact of centralized monetary policy, one must first examine the fragmented, highly localized, and profoundly chaotic economic landscape of the early to high medieval period. Following the collapse of centralized Roman administrative authority, the institutional capacity to issue standard, universally accepted currency completely disintegrated across the European continent. The resulting monetary landscape was characterized by extreme decentralization, a phenomenon most visibly and disastrously realized in regions like the Holy Roman Empire, which existed as a sprawling, convoluted patchwork of hundreds of semi-independent principalities, bishoprics, duchies, and free cities. Because the right to issue coinage was viewed as a primary symbol of local aristocratic authority and a highly reliable source of territorial revenue, thousands of independent local mints proliferated across the continent, each producing its own distinct variation of the silver penny, denier, or pfennig. This hyperfragmentation meant that the concept of a national economy was virtually non-existent. A merchant attempting to transport goods from the thriving North Sea coastal ports to the lucrative markets beyond the Alpine passes would be forced to navigate a chaotic, constantly shifting matrix of regional currencies. The vast majority of these local coins were entirely inconsistent in weight, fineness, and reliability. The monetary confusion was further exacerbated by the physical vulnerability of the currency itself. In an era before the advent of machine-milled coin edges, the most prevalent and economically destructive methods of currency degradation were the illicit practices of clipping and sweating. Clipping involved the careful, precise shaving of silver fragments from the irregular edges of a hammered coin. This allowed the perpetrator to secretly accumulate highly valuable silver bullion, while subsequently passing off the diminished, lighter coin in the marketplace at its original legal face value. Sweating was a somewhat more insidious and mass-scale process, wherein hundreds of silver coins were placed together in a leather bag and violently shaken for extended periods. The resulting fine silver dust that collected at the bottom of the bag was subsequently melted down into solid silver bullion, leaving the original coins physically lighter but ostensibly visually intact to the untrained eye. As millions of clipped, sweated, and deliberately shaved coins circulated throughout the arteries of the European economy, fundamental trust in the medium of exchange evaporated.
The physical degradation of the currency triggered a devastating economic paralysis, effectively halting the progress of long-distance trade. Merchants, unable to trust the stamped face value of the myriad coins presented to them, were forced to meticulously weigh and chemically assay every individual piece of silver manually, imposing catastrophic transaction costs and severe delays on everyday commercial activity. The widespread circulation of these debased coins was heavily influenced by a powerful economic dynamic that would later be formalized as Gresham's law, the fundamental monetary principle that bad money drives out good money. In the medieval marketplace, there existed a strict and highly consequential dichotomy between coins circulating by tale, accepted by their official legal face value, and coins circulating by weight, valued strictly by their intrinsic measurable metallic content. For the vast majority of the illiterate agrarian public handling small daily retail transactions, coins were inevitably accepted by tale, as the costs, time, and metallurgical complexities of verifying the exact silver content of a single penny were highly prohibitive. However, sophisticated actors within the economy, such as master goldsmiths, international merchants, and professional money changers, operated entirely by weight. When a sovereign minted new, full-weight, high-purity coins and released them into general circulation alongside the existing pool of clipped and sweated coins, these knowledgeable financial actors immediately recognized the discrepancy. They would systematically hoard the superior currency or melt it down for lucrative export to foreign bullion markets, while deliberately utilizing the degraded, inferior coins to pay their domestic debts, purchase local goods, and settle tax liabilities. As a direct result of this relentless arbitrage, the good silver was continually siphoned out of the domestic economy, leaving only the bad money to facilitate commerce, creating a perpetual cycle of monetary degradation. This pervasive monetary chaos posed an existential threat to the emergence of centralized royal authority, specifically by crippling the collection of the predictable, standardized tax revenues required to fund a state apparatus. A monarch could not effectively project military power, sustain a royal court, and enforce the king's peace if the vital taxes remitted by provincial sheriffs arrived at the capital in the form of severely diminished, clipped, and fundamentally unreliable silver pieces. The English crown, recognizing the severity of this structural problem, innovated one of the earliest, most sophisticated, and enduring bureaucratic institutions of the Middle Ages to combat it: the exchequer. The exchequer derived its rather unusual name from the checkered cloth that adorned the central accounting table, a visual grid featuring stripes of about the breadth of a human hand, creating a pattern closely resembling a chessboard. This cloth was not merely decorative, it was a highly functional calculating device. Because many of the provincial sheriffs and local officials responsible for collecting and submitting royal taxes were illiterate and incapable of complex written mathematics, the counting table provided a vital, universally understood physical medium for calculation. By moving physical counters across the distinct spaces representing pounds, shillings, and pence, the officials could calculate, in plain sight and beyond dispute, exactly how much revenue was owed to the crown and how much had actually been physically paid. The meticulously recorded results of these massive annual audits were documented on parchment rolls known as pipe rolls, creating a nearly continuous, highly detailed written record of the English monarchy's financial resources, debts, and expenditures from the financial year of 1130 to 1131 until the 19th century. But simply counting the coins was insufficient in an era of rampant clipping and counterfeiting. To combat the constant influx of debased silver into the royal treasury, the exchequer instituted the rigorous, highly intimidating process of the combustion assay. When a sheriff arrived in London to deliver the annual tax farm, his deposited coins were not blindly accepted by tale. Instead, as detailed in the invaluable 12th century administrative manual Dialogus de Scaccarium, the dialogue concerning the exchequer, written by the royal treasurer Richard Fitz-Nitel, a random sample of the sheriff's silver was subjected to a trial by fire. The coins were melted down in a crucible over an open flame to completely burn away any base metal impurities, lead or copper that counterfeiters might have cleverly introduced. The remaining pure, refined silver was then carefully weighed. If the sample fell short of the required standard weight, a heavy combustion penalty was strictly applied to the entirety of the sheriff's deposit, and the official was personally forced to make up the difference out of his own pocket. This brutal system ensured that sheriffs aggressively policed the moneyers in their own local jurisdictions, heavily punishing those who produced substandard currency. To track these complex fractional payments, outstanding debts, and combustion penalties securely in an era without widespread paper currency or double-entry bookkeeping, the exchequer relied heavily on the ingeniously simple technology of wooden tally sticks. A strip of wood was precisely notched to indicate the exact sum paid, with different sized notches representing different denominations, and then violently split down the middle so that the unique wood grain matched perfectly on both halves. The payers, such as the sheriff, kept the stock as an unforgeable physical receipt, while the exchequer retained the foil. Millions of these wooden tallies were utilized over the centuries, creating a virtually fraud-proof record of financial transactions that was essential when coinage was scarce or unreliable.
The system was so deeply ingrained in the fiscal architecture of the state that the English government continued to use tallies long after they became technologically obsolete. It was not until 1834 that the exchequer finally decided to destroy its vast, centuries-old archive of wooden tallies by burning them in a furnace, a disposal effort that accidentally sparked a massive blaze that famously burned down the Houses of Parliament. Yet despite the remarkable administrative innovations of the exchequer, the combustion assays, and the tally sticks, the underlying chaos of the debased penny remained a structural ceiling on state capacity. Kings realized that to truly consolidate their sovereign power, they could not merely audit the money supply after the fact, they had to absolutely monopolize its creation. The profound limitations and inherent instability of the fragmented, debased penny economy forced European monarchs to engineer a massive technological and administrative paradigm shift. The structural solution to the perpetual monetary crisis was a decisive continent-wide move toward much larger, highly standardized, high-purity silver coins that could command absolute international trust and efficiently facilitate bulk commercial transactions without the constant need for localized weighing and chemical testing. This critical evolution, often referred to by historians as the medieval silver revolution, saw the introduction of robust, recognizable new denominations, such as the French gros tournois, the English groat, and eventually highly pure gold coins like the Florentine florin and the Neapolitan agaustal. The terminology itself was indicative of the change. The English word groat derived directly from the medieval French gros, meaning large or thick, highlighting its substantial size relative to the tiny, fragile silver pennies of the earlier era. By issuing coins that were physically larger, heavier, and significantly thicker, centralized states made the illicit practices of clipping and sweating far more difficult to execute and immediately visually apparent to the average untrained merchant in the marketplace. The commercial success and widespread adoption of the groat and the florin was not merely a matter of aesthetic design or physical size. It was fundamentally underwritten by a severe, state-enforced revolution in metallurgical discipline. To convince the highly skeptical broader European market that their currency was a perfectly stable store of value, monarchs aggressively established highly centralized, technologically advanced mints, systematically crushing independent regional competitors. In 1279, for example, King Edward I of England executed a sweeping authoritarian unification of the nation's historically fragmented monetary system. He aggressively closed down dozens of provincial mints across the countryside and centralized the vast majority of English coin production within the heavily fortified, highly secure walls of the Tower of London. This physical consolidation of the moneyers allowed the Crown to exert direct, uncompromising oversight over the master assayers, smelters, and goldsmiths who governed the purity of the realm's precious metals. The core of this rigorous metallurgical discipline was the ancient but newly optimized science of fire assaying and cupellation. Cupellation was a meticulous, highly technical process used to extract completely pure silver from lead ores and base metal alloys.
Master assayers at the central royal mints would carefully weigh a sample of raw incoming bullion and place it into a small, porous, shallow dish called a cupel, which was typically fashioned from highly compressed bone ash, as this material offered superior absorption qualities. The bone ash cupel was then placed into a specialized furnace and heated to extreme, precise temperatures. As the metallic alloy melted, the lead and base metals oxidized. The porous bone ash cupel absorbed the liquid lead oxide, known as litharge, like a sponge, while the base metals dissolved away. Because precious metals do not easily oxidize, the process left behind a perfectly formed, brilliant bead of pure silver resting cleanly on the surface of the cupel. By meticulously weighing this pure silver bead and comparing it to the weight of the original raw sample, the assayer could determine the exact fineness of the bullion with remarkable accuracy. This precise scientific measurement allowed the centralized mint to guarantee that every single groat produced contained an exact, legally mandated percentage of precious metal. For the testing of gold currency, such as the widely circulated florin or the English gold noble, medieval assayers relied on a different, equally rigorous technique utilizing the touchstone. A touchstone was a dark, highly abrasive piece of slate, chert, or siltstone, often historically associated with the Lydian stone of antiquity. By firmly dragging a suspect gold coin across the surface of the stone, it left a distinct streak of metallic residue. Assayers would then create parallel streaks using a set of standard needles of known, verified gold purity. The assayer would visually compare the color of the streaks, and to ensure ultimate accuracy, they would apply highly corrosive chemical acids to the stone. Nitric acid, known in the medieval period as aqua fortis, was applied to dissolve away any fraudulent base metals that a counterfeiter might cleverly alloy into the gold. For higher carat alloys, a potent mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acids, known as aqua regia, was utilized. The sophisticated application of these alchemical liquids, carefully documented in contemporary practical compendiums like those of the 15th century printer Arnaldus de Bruxelles, allowed mint officials to detect even minor deviations from the legal standard. To ensure that the powerful officials running the centralized mints did not themselves succumb to corruption and secretly debase the royal coinage for personal enrichment, monarchs instituted rigorous, highly publicized, and deeply traditional systems of judicial quality control. The most famous and enduring of these mechanisms was the trial of the Picts, an ancient judicial ceremony originating in England prior to 1282. Throughout the operational year, a random, statistically significant sample of freshly struck coins, for instance 1 out of every 15,000 silver coins or 1 out of every 10,000 gold coins, was sequestered in small packets of 50. These packets were securely sealed inside a specialized wooden chest known as the pyx, deriving its name from the Greek word pyxis.
Once a year, a formal, independent jury comprised entirely of elite, highly skilled metallurgical assayers drawn from the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths was convened at Goldsmiths Hall in London. Presided over by a senior High Court judge known as the King's Remembrancer, the jury would publicly unseal the pyx boxes and subject the sample coins to exhaustive weight checks and fire assays, comparing them against standardized metal trial plates provided by the government. In this highly theatrical legal setting, the master of the mint was effectively placed on trial. If the coinage was found to be substandard, falling outside the legally permitted margins of error, the penalties were catastrophic, ranging from colossal financial fines and immediate removal from office to lengthy imprisonment. The absolute independence of the assaying jury ensured that the public could place unwavering trust in the output of the royal mint. For common counterfeiters, forgers, and clippers who lacked official standing and dared to undermine the integrity of the royal currency for personal gain, the medieval state responded with unmitigated, spectacular terror. The medieval legal and theological mind viewed the debasement of the king's coin not merely as a localized financial crime or simple theft, but as a direct, intolerable assault on the physical sovereignty of the state itself, a profound form of high treason. Consequently, the punishment for counterfeiting was explicitly designed to be a macabre, highly theatrical spectacle of absolute torment aimed at maximizing public deterrence. Throughout England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire,
Convicted coin forgers were frequently sentenced to be boiled alive. In this gruesome ritual of state power, victims were bound and lowered by heavy chains into massive copper cauldrons filled with bubbling water, hot oil, molten lead, or boiling wine. This excruciatingly slow, progressive execution was intended to physically and symbolically dissolve the criminal's body, directly mirroring the illicit chemical dissolution and melting they had performed on the king's precious metals. The haunting presence of these execution cauldrons permanently affixed to the outside walls of city mints and public weighhouses, such as the infamous counterfeiter's cauldron hung at the Waag in the city of Deventer following the boiling of the Battenberg mintmaster in 1434, served as a grim, daily psychological deterrent, physically securing the metallurgical boundary of the state's money. In England, the horrific practice was utilized for both poisoners and counterfeiters alike, with notable instances including the public boiling of Richard Rouse at Smithfield in 1531 and Margaret Davy in 1542. Edward I was equally ruthless in his pursuit of clippers. In 1278, he arrested roughly 600 English Jews, imprisoning them in the Tower of London under sweeping, largely fabricated charges of mass coin clipping, eventually executing hundreds and culminating in the tragic Edict of Expulsion in 1290. The draconian enforcement of metallurgical purity and the violent suppression of counterfeiting yielded a profound continent-wide macroeconomic dividend. Because the standardized Groat and the high-purity florin could finally be trusted across borders without the constant, paralyzing need for localized weighing and chemical testing, international transaction costs plummeted. This newfound state-enforced trust in standard currency directly catalyzed the rapid expansion of international merchant networks. Silver extracted from the booming, highly productive mines of Central Europe flowed seamlessly westward through the Rhineland, heavily enriching bullion markets in cities like Cologne, before moving into the great champagne fairs of eastern France. These massive seasonal commercial hubs in towns like Troyes and Provence served as the premier commercial hubs of the medieval world, connecting the lucrative northern European woolen and cloth industries of Flanders with the high-value Mediterranean luxury goods imported by Italian merchants. To effectively manage the sheer, unprecedented volume of this standardized wealth, sophisticated Italian banking houses from Florence, Siena, Genoa, and Venice developed complex financial instruments, most notably the bill of exchange. These highly advanced paper contracts allowed merchants to deposit standard silver groats or gold florins with a banker in one city, such as Lucca or Florence, and draw equivalent funds in another city, such as at the champagne fairs, at a predetermined exchange rate. This system allowed merchants to entirely bypass the severe physical dangers of transporting bulk silver bullion across bandit-infested medieval territories, while also legally circumventing the strict church bans on usury by hiding interest payments within the fluctuating geographic exchange rates. By engineering a perfectly stable, universally trusted physical currency through the disciplined application of fire and iron, medieval monarchs had inadvertently laid the vital groundwork for the first sophisticated pan-European financial credit system. The aggressive stabilization and intense centralization of the money supply by medieval sovereigns was not primarily driven by an altruistic, enlightened desire to stimulate international merchant trade or ease the burdens of the peasantry. It was, at its absolute core, a desperate existential strategic necessity driven by the rapidly evolving nature of medieval warfare. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the traditional feudal levy, a highly localized system in which a king called upon his regional barons to provide a strict quota of heavily armored knights for a highly limited, typically 40-day campaigning season, had become disastrously obsolete and tactically inflexible. The sprawling battlefields of Europe were increasingly dominated not by aristocratic cavalry, but by highly trained, specialized, and lethal infantry units, such as English longbowmen, Genoese crossbowmen, and Swiss pikemen. A skilled English longbowman, capable of repeatedly firing heavy arrows with enough force to pierce French plate armor at a distance, required years of dedicated physical conditioning, muscular development, and constant, mandated practice. Such an elite soldier could not simply be summoned from a turnip field for a few weeks of amateur service. He was a hardened professional, and professionals demanded regular, liquid wages. Maintaining these permanent standing armies required staggering, unprecedented amounts of hard currency. A single longbowman in the royal army of King Edward III cost the English crown approximately 6 pence a day in wages, amounting to roughly £9 every year. Meanwhile, maintaining a fully equipped knight and his extensive required retinue of squires, armorers, and specialized war horses cost upwards of £40 a year. To adequately finance a prolonged continental siege, garrison newly captured fortresses in Brittany or Gascony, or launch an expeditionary campaign across the English Channel, monarchs needed a massive, continuous, and highly reliable pipeline of silver groats and pennies.
They achieved this vital liquidity by fundamentally transforming their centralized mints into direct, highly efficient engines of war finance through the relentless extraction of seigniorage. Seigniorage was the mandatory fee the crown charged private merchants, consortia, and ordinary citizens for the legal privilege of converting raw silver bullion or foreign currency into official, legal tender domestic coinage. Whenever a merchant brought a pound of raw silver to the heavily guarded Tower of London, the Royal Mint would extract a percentage of the metal to cover the physical production costs, known as brassage, and a significant direct profit margin for the king, seigniorage, before returning the remainder to the merchant in the form of freshly struck legal coins. Every single coin that entered circulation, therefore, generated a direct, immediate fiscal dividend that could be seamlessly diverted to the royal armories to purchase arrows, secure naval transport, and hire foreign mercenaries. However, when conventional domestic taxation, standard mint seigniorage, and the exploitation of newly discovered silver mines proved utterly insufficient to sustain the exorbitant, spiraling costs of total war, monarchs deployed the most devastating, controversial fiscal weapon in their administrative arsenal: the deliberate, state-sponsored debasement of their own currency. The mechanics of debasement were administratively simple but economically ruinous. A desperate king would secretly order the master of the royal mint to drastically reduce the precious silver content of the coinage by melting it down and mixing in much higher ratios of cheap base metals, typically copper. Crucially, the state would violently mandate that the new, heavily adulterated coins continue to circulate in the marketplace at the exact same legal face value as the older, pure silver ones. Because the mint was now producing significantly more coins from the exact same volume of precious metal, the king's seigniorage profits skyrocketed overnight, providing an immediate, massive influx of liquid cash to pay the army and satisfy impatient creditors. The most notorious, destructive architect of this invisible financial warfare was King Philip IV of France, widely known as Philip the Fair, who ruled from 1285 to 1314. Locked in a cripplingly expensive, protracted conflict over the lucrative territory of Gascony with his rival King Edward I of England, and simultaneously facing rebellions in French-controlled Flanders, Philip found his national treasury completely exhausted. Unwilling to surrender his territorial ambitions and unable to secure massive sovereign loans from increasingly wary Italian bankers, Philip, guided by his ruthless finance minister and head of the state mint, Etienne Barbet, suspended the production of the renowned high-purity Gros Tournois in 1295. Over the next decade, the French crown systematically gutted the silver content of its national currency in a desperate bid for revenue. By 1302, the widely used French denier contained barely a third of what it had possessed at the beginning of Philip's reign. Because these newly minted coins had a heavily reduced silver content and a massive influx of copper, they should have naturally appeared darker and duller in color, instantly alerting the public to the fraud. To cleverly conceal this state-sponsored debasement, the Royal Mint applied a specialized chemical wash process to the blank coins to give them the temporary, shining illusion of having a high silver content. This blatant manipulation earned Philip IV the infamous eternal nickname of the Counterfeiter King, le faux monnayeur. While this aggressive monetary manipulation was highly successful in the short term, allowing Philip IV to generate an astonishing 60% of his total royal revenue directly from the mint during peak debasement periods in 1298 and 1299, it inflicted profound, generational, structural damage on the French economy. Pope Boniface VIII fiercely criticized the king's currency manipulation, a conflict that eventually escalated until Philip aggressively dispatched agents to have the pope arrested.
The contemporary Italian poet Dante Alighieri immortalized the king's unprecedented monetary misdeeds in the Divine Comedy, writing in Paradiso, "There shall be seen the woe that on the Seine he brings by falsifying of the coin, branding him a counterfeiter, falseggio." Furthermore, extracting a national economy from the addictive cycle of a debasement proved immensely perilous. When the war temporarily concluded and Philip IV attempted to restore the French currency back to its original, respected high silver standard in 2006, the resultant severe deflationary shockwave triggered mass urban unrest, as Parisian landlords legally demanded that their impoverished tenants pay their rents using the newly restored, highly precious coins rather than the abundant, near-worthless, debased ones they actually possessed. The citizens of Paris violently rebelled. Viewing the policy as a hostile repudiation of the king's own currency, an angry mob raided and completely destroyed the sprawling home of the finance minister, Etienne Barbet, forcing the counterfeiter king to temporarily flee his own capital in terror. The uprising was ultimately met with brutal state suppression, resulting in 21 rioters being hanged at the city gates, a bloody testament to the volatility of medieval monetary policy. Across the English Channel, King Edward III utilized the output of the centralized royal mint not only to pay his formidable longbowmen, but to project absolute psychological dominance during the escalating Hundred Years' War. Following a catastrophic English naval victory over the superior French fleet at Sluis in 1340, a pivotal battle that secured English dominance over the English Channel and paved the way for massive continental invasions, Edward was nonetheless faced with severe, crippling financial shortfalls. Rather than engaging in the catastrophic, highly unpopular secret debasements of the French model, Edward III weaponized the currency through the strategic introduction of the magnificent gold noble in 1344. The gold noble was a massive, visually stunning coin containing twice the gold of the standard florin, explicitly functioning as potent state propaganda. The obverse of the coin prominently depicted the English king standing triumphantly, fully armed with sword and shield, in a ship riding the waves, a direct, unmistakable commemoration of the great naval triumph at Sluis, and a bold, physical assertion of his contested claim to the throne of France. Edward bolstered this monetary propaganda with cultural institutions, famously creating the Order of the Garter to build martial camaraderie among his elite commanders, including his son, the Black Prince. However, even the successful issuance of the Groat and the propagandistic gold noble could not ultimately bridge the staggering, astronomical deficits generated by Edward III's endless continental campaigns, chevauchées, and sieges. To maintain his professional war machine, Edward borrowed unfathomable sums from the elite Italian super companies of Florence, most notably the immensely powerful Bardi and Peruzzi banking houses. These sophisticated bankers who managed the immense wealth generated by the Champagne fairs and dominated Mediterranean trade extended vast credit lines to the English crown on the assumption that lucrative English wool exports would serve as secure collateral. When the logistics of the war faltered, taxation stalled, and the debts became insurmountable, Edward III took the drastic step of simply declaring a sovereign default in the 1340s.
The king refused to repay his massive obligations, effectively bankrupting the Bardi and Peruzzi houses and triggering a cascading financial contagion that devastated the economy of Florence, ironically paving the way for the later rise of the Medici family. While Edward eventually paid over £23,000 to the Bardi representatives later in his reign, the damage was done. Through aggressive debasement, the striking of propaganda coinage, and devastating strategic defaults, bullion had unequivocally become the ultimate weapon of medieval statecraft. The profound economic turbulence generated by the intersection of aggressive monetary policy and total warfare in the 14th century catalyzed an intellectual and administrative awakening that fundamentally birthed the concept of modern fiscal sovereignty. Prior to this era, the issuance of money was often viewed as a somewhat decentralized, highly fluid prerogative shared among regional barons, wealthy bishops, and distant monarchs.
However, as kings systematically eliminated local mints and ruthlessly enforced the exclusive circulation of their own standardized groats and nobles, they forged a direct, inescapable psychological link between the physical currency in a peasant's pocket and the abstract, distant authority of the centralized state. The king's face, stamped securely and uniformly onto a high-purity silver coin, became a daily, tactile reminder of the crown's ubiquitous power. By successfully monopolizing the money supply, monarchs effectively dismantled the long-standing economic independence of the feudal nobility, ensuring that all significant commercial activity and military financing had to flow directly through the narrow bottleneck of the royal mint. This aggressive centralization and the subsequent abuse of monetary power did not go unchallenged. The devastating social consequences of royal debasement, such as the violent urban riots of 1306 under Philip IV and the broader economic inflation that immiserated the working peasantry, sparked a fierce philosophical and theological backlash across Europe. The most brilliant, systematic, and enduring articulation of this intellectual resistance was authored by Nicole Oresme, a highly influential 14th-century French bishop, mathematician, and philosopher who served as a master at the College of Navarre and later as the Bishop of Rouen. In his seminal, groundbreaking treatise, De Moneda, on coins, written against the backdrop of the devastating Hundred Years' War, Oresme laid down a devastating, logically rigorous critique of the king's right to manipulate the currency. Rooting his sophisticated arguments deeply in Aristotelian principles regarding the natural origins of wealth, Oresme boldly declared that money is not the private, personal property of the ruling prince. Rather, it is the fundamental property of the community that relies upon it to facilitate exchange. Oresme was one of the very first economic thinkers to explicitly conceptualize inflation via debasement as a regressive, hidden, and unconstitutional tax. He argued forcefully that when a monarch secretly hollows out the silver content of the coinage to fund wars, he is engaging in an act of profound tyranny, robbing every citizen from the wealthiest international merchant to the poorest agrarian laborer without their consent or parliamentary approval. Furthermore, Oresme clearly recognized and articulated the mechanics of what would later become known as Gresham's Law, astutely noting that rampant debasement would inevitably drive good bullion out of the country, crippling the very foundations of international trade. By formally defining the ethical limits of monetary production and defending the intrinsic metallic value of currency, Oresme inadvertently helped forge the early modern concept of the social contract, suggesting that a sovereign's fundamental legitimacy was entirely contingent upon his responsibility to maintain a stable, uncorrupted currency for the benefit of the Commonwealth. Yet, alongside Oresme's strict Aristotelian insistence on the absolute necessity of intrinsic metallic value, an entirely different, highly sophisticated intellectual tradition was simultaneously taking root in the medieval universities and royal courts, one that would ultimately triumph and shape the entirety of the modern Fiat state architecture. This was the chartalism, nominalism, command approach to money. Tracing its deep intellectual lineage from the rudimentary observations of Plato through the meticulous legal frameworks of Roman legists like Javelinus, Paulus, and Oppian, medieval European legal scholars such as Dumoulin, Hotman, and Budagella began to argue a radically different thesis. The physical material of a coin was fundamentally irrelevant to its function as money. These scholars, echoing monetary developments that had evolved completely independently in China under Confucian and Lige's thought, recognized that coins functioned essentially as standardized securities, tokens of state debt. In this chartalist view, a debt was legally serviced and taxes were validly paid not because a specific, highly pure lump of silver was tendered, but because the state explicitly mandated the acceptance of a nominal unit of account. Clay, lead, paper, or copper could serve as money just as effectively as gold, provided the state mandated its use. The essence of money, therefore, was not defined by its metallurgical purity, but its chartality, the legally enforceable promise it embedded, and its supreme capacity to extinguish tax liabilities.
This theoretical breakthrough regarding the nominal nature of money was practically applied in the fiery crucible of late medieval warfare. Because major military conflicts were incredibly expensive and highly unpredictable, standard domestic taxation and mint seigniorage could rarely cover the immediate, massive upfront costs of a sustained military campaign. Consequently, states were forced to invent novel financial mechanisms to borrow heavily against their own future tax revenues. The wealthy Italian city-states, continuously embroiled in fierce, expensive mercenary warfare and lacking large agrarian tax bases, led this critical innovation by establishing the first functional national treasuries and transferable public debts. By creating sophisticated centralized ledgers of state debt that citizens could buy, sell, and trade in the open market, republics like Venice, Genoa, and Florence effectively synthesized an entirely new form of money. These sovereign bonds were entirely disconnected from physical bullion stored in a vault. Their immense value was derived solely from the sovereign's legally binding promise to repay the debt using future tax extraction. The ability to issue debt against a highly stable, widely trusted unit of account allowed the state to mobilize capital on a scale that completely dwarfed the capacities of traditional land-based feudal systems. Thus, the fiscal sovereignty of the modern nation-state was fully born, a centralized, bureaucratic authority capable of projecting immense military power not merely through the hoarding of physical gold, but through the mastery of ledgers, the management of public debt, and the supreme legal power to unconditionally define the unit of account.
The historical, bloody trajectory from the chaotic, clipped pennies of the early Middle Ages to the sophisticated, debt-financed war machines of the Renaissance represents one of the most critical and enduring evolutions in the history of human governance. The relentless, often violent quest of medieval monarchs to establish absolute metallurgical discipline, to scientifically refine silver with bone ash couples, to test gold with highly corrosive aqua fortis, and to legally institutionalize public trust through the solemn, terrifying trial of the Picts, was not merely an exercise in bureaucratic financial housekeeping. It was the foundational engineering of modern statecraft. By standardizing the Groat and the florin and violently destroying those who sought to undermine them, kings inadvertently mapped the geopolitical contours of the modern world. A reliable, universally accepted currency allowed for the permanent dissolution of unreliable temporary feudal levies, replacing them entirely with professional, state-monopolized standing armies that could definitively assert hard borders and efficiently crush regional rebellions.
The everlasting legacy of metallurgical discipline and centralized monetary control resonates powerfully within the complex fiscal structures of the contemporary global economy. While the physical cauldrons of boiling oil in Deventer and the abrasive Lydian touchstones have long been relegated to museum displays, the underlying mechanics, philosophies, and structures of monetary sovereignty remain entirely unchanged. The medieval chartalist realization that money is ultimately a creature of the state, a nominal token defined entirely by its unique ability to clear tax liabilities rather than its intrinsic material worth, is the exact theoretical architecture that currently underpins the entire modern global fiat system. Today's central banks, utilizing highly advanced tools like quantitative easing, interest rate manipulation, and complex digital ledgers, are executing the very same macroeconomic strategies pioneered by medieval exchequers when they carefully balanced wooden tally sticks and aggressively manipulated the bullion output of the Tower of London Mint. Furthermore, as the global economy rapidly transitions into an unprecedented age of programmable digital assets, decentralized finance, and algorithmic sovereignty, the historical warnings articulated by Nicole Oresme in the 14th century remain profoundly relevant. The inherent, unavoidable tension between a community's desire for a perfectly stable, uncorrupted store of value to facilitate trade and a sovereign state's constant, overwhelming temptation to debase that value to fund deficits and foreign wars is an eternal geopolitical struggle.
Just as the introduction of the standardized silver groat successfully ended the economic paralysis of the clipped penny and fueled a massive renaissance of global trade across the champagne fairs, modern technological shifts in how society defines, secures, and transfers value are poised to fundamentally redraw the boundaries of state power. Ultimately, the turbulent medieval history of monetary policy proves that the true enduring foundation of a nation is not its military hardware, its impregnable castles, or its geographic borders, but the unwavering psychological trust its people are willing to place in its absolute integrity of its ledger.